session or for the whole conference?
The whole conference.
The biggest thing, well, I guess closing the gap that matters, thinking about how like we're not always comparing different groups of students, and we see a lot of data about which students are achieving on the SAT and which aren't, but thinking about like how we can just make a better education for one student. If I was Daisy's teacher, how could I make a better education for her? And I was like so impressed by these teachers that were in my group, because they were thinking about how this could be changed to be better taught to just one student in their class, not their whole class, but like this one student might learn better if we gave him this prompt, let him have 10 minutes to think about it, and then put him within a group. And just like we wanted teachers to have moments like that, and so that was, I don't know, really rewarding for me to hear.
Any questions about the models, each other's models? Maybe. Sorry?
The process of
modeling.
I have a question. How many people doing the modeling in here at some point felt a little frustrated? I felt a little frustrated a couple times. I just was curious as to if anybody else did. Yeah, because there's so many, I mean, collaboration wasn't frustrating, but trying to wrap your head around such a profound question, like what is the ideal education, is a struggle. And imagine having kids trying, it puts us in your shoes, and understanding that sometimes what we do, although it's valuable, can be really difficult and rewarding at the same time. So thank you for having us do it.
One question I asked related to that was, what do you do with a type of learner that I would just say I am, that would really love to sit by herself for 10 minutes or so and think this through before I jumped in and had to say anything? And I think that was recognized, and I think one solution could be, they were saying that if you could have everyone do something on their own and then come together and show what you came up with on your own, and then make it even better as a group.
Be great jigsaw activity.
Absolutely. The biggest thing, I mean, before, we knew we wanted to have adults model just because we had done it on a smaller scale before. We thought it was super interesting, and you guys' presentations were awesome. But we didn't have the ideal education prompt until later, because we ended up modeling that, and we were like, it might be really interesting to see how ours compare. The biggest thing is we just wanted to go through the process that we go through of like becoming attached to these ideas. That's our intellectual property, because words are kind of shared, like we all speak the same language that is words, but if we have these like symbols and we put them in the context of a bunch of symbols on one thing, like the ownership you have over that, you asked like what's some of the most rewarding things I've had at Cary Academy, is like I have ownership over these models, and like they're my intellectual property, and like I feel like some students don't necessarily leave school having their own intellectual property the way that I feel like I've been given.
That's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah. That helps a lot, because I know that we struggled on coming up with our representations, and would you be able to understand it? And Varun kept guiding us. They don't need to understand it. You're going to explain it. It's your representation.
Exactly.
So,
Yes. You can't be wrong.
and it was very difficult for us to get past that. I mean, at least for me, I could talk for myself, to get past that idea. Well, they're not going to understand that. They're not going to understand. Well, you're going to explain it to them. Okay.
Yeah, I had the same feeling.
Yeah.
I said that, like, you can't be wrong, but at the same time, you can't be correct to the same extent. Like, so that's why they kept saying, like, oh, is this right? Is this right? Like, I feel like this is wrong, but then I'm like, I mean, it's wrong, but it's also right. So like, that's the most frustrating part. Because it's like, it's all in the abstract, and so that's where it becomes challenging.
One of the most interesting pieces for me, hearing all of the other three models, was your process along the way.
Yes.
So I really appreciated that, the fact that you not only explained the model, but you also talked about how we got to this, and then we went to that, and then we went to this.
It's very important, like this group did. They said they had the son, but they got rid of it for a deliberate reason. They said it had no value. Or if, let's say, they did have a son, that they did have a deliberate value, and it's important to discuss the things that you did and didn't do, and that kind of just goes with the process. And it's kind of like analogous to learning. There's a process of learning. There's things you should and you will and will not do. It's important to realize that and then maybe share that with everyone else, kind of like what you did. You said, well, we could have done this, but we didn't because this so and so.
The biggest things we wanted you to take away from this, like learning about this teaching technique, is the transferability aspect, that we use it in science classes, we use it in English and history classes here. And then also just this idea that like when you take ownership for something that you hold on to it so much longer. Yesterday, Neil talked about watching me and Sammy erasing all these boards for everyone, like 60 or so. And Sammy actually ran across a model she made in 9th grade and erased that board. And it was made completely just of dots and squares. I told them this, so. But she remembered it. Like, she remembered it exactly, and she spoke through it. It was her Just War model in 9th grade, and she remembered it. And, like, that was, like, the perfect testament to how wonderful this process is for students, is that Sammy could remember her model Just War in 9th grade.
I think another really positive aspect of it is I loved the way everyone conceptualized the same basic topic in so differently, and that's all okay, and it's good for kids to see that too, because I know I see too often they're so worried about the right answer. They're afraid to take risks. They're afraid to go out on a limb and say, what about this or what about that? They want to know. I get asked that question a lot when you might be going over an answer key and you tell them that the answer is this, and maybe to a written question, they'll say, well, this is what mine says, and they can't seem to understand that what they said is the same or just as good or maybe even better. They want you to affirm theirs. You know what I mean? So I think that we were, definitely word oriented. It was hard for us to give up the words. We didn't have the rule that you couldn't use words, but she did, encourage us to do some symbols at the end. And then the other piece, I think we were a little more global in the way we thought about it, and some people were much more detailed. So I think it's just fascinating to watch the same thing be conceptualized in different ways.
Was it a disadvantage that you two worked together, or an advantage? I mean, you're from the same school.
Right.
Yeah.
Different divisions,
We don't work
Yeah.
together. We don't teach together,
right.
but we do. We're in the same department. I don't know.
Their collaborative process was really strong, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was great.
I told her together we had one brain.
Right, yeah.
I thought it went really well.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think it's a disadvantage.
And so the last thing that we want to say is also it fosters a lot of discussion. Usually, like, we didn't simulate it completely, where normally when people present, we would have the questions right after, and you might ask questions kind of like, I might have represented, they represented resilience with a bouncing ball. I might have represented resilience with someone falling and then standing back up, so you can kind of challenge your ideas. And I think the example that I gave to them is, if you asked, the first thing we ever modeled, we talked about our first modeling experience, was what is civilization, and we modeled it in 9th grade history. And so if you asked, a classroom of students, what is civilization, how many kids' hands would shoot up? But like, when we had to do our models for what is civilization, we spent a month and a half, I think, on what is civilization, showing our models and debating them. So just the amount of discussion that it promotes is incredible.
But do you feel like I did be devil's advocate here, do you feel like you missed out on any content that the teacher could have covered because you spent so long on that one concept? Because I think that's where my brain goes. Like, if I spend a month and a half on that, and what about all the other things I need to make sure I teach them? Maybe just comment on that.
Does anybody else want to comment on that?
I want to kind of, because in that class he really focused on teaching concepts, and while it is true that like we may have sacrificed some content, like I may have not have learned like every single one of the laws in Hammurabi's code or whatever, I did learn about cycles and like cycles of history. And as you can see in a lot of these subjects, the same things happen over and over again, like nature, there's golden ratio, all that jazz. And it happens over and over again. And if I can get that one big broad topic and just apply it to every single scenario, then I can eventually get the content I need without having to have it be taught to me in such a specific way, like, oh, here's a PowerPoint, this happened then, that kind of thing.
I think the frustrating part is, and where real reform is going to come, is that we feed into, each one of us feeds into the next level. So if you take that approach at your school, that's wonderful, but where you go, can you use that again? You know what I mean? Are you going to be tested on, in what year was blah, 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 which I think your way is much better, don't get me wrong. But I find that it's difficult, because I'd rather go deep than go wide. I really would, and not cover so many of Hammurabi's, the codes. But
I think that's when the whole like reforming the system or like shifting the educational paradigm thing comes into play. Like, like what you're saying is you're scared of like taking that new avenue of going deep, and then like because we're not preparing them for the next level, and like at that point kind of perpetuating the problem that we're like discussing, I guess. And so yeah, it's going to be like hard. But like for example, Mr. Coven's class is all like, conceptual and all, and I was in that class 9th grade, and Like I'm in A-push now, and I'm not having like having some sort of disability to, not disability, but more trouble memorizing stuff or understanding stuff than someone else because of Mr. Coven's like conceptual class in 9th grade. So I don't think it's like really like hurting us for the next level, but like I think that it is the right step.
That would be the worst thing, but I would not want to do that to a student who's at a disadvantage, for the next step. And I think because I teach little ones, we're so skill-based. It's a little different than what you do in
It would have
upper
to
school.
probably be more of like a piece that you incorporate
Yes.
rather than the whole thing, which is totally like an appropriate use and actually the way it's used in most classes besides Mr. Coven's, especially like in science classes, because there is some element of new learning that has to be done.
Right.
You have to have the vocabulary to apply it to concepts.
Right.
Sorry. Okay, well, I think that is what we do at Carey Academy because we do have this or at least in the history department, because Mr. Coven's class is primarily model based, but as we go in the upper levels like U.S. history or European history, it is in a different it is using a different learning style, and some students might prefer one over another. I think they're all valid. But I think a lot of students start in 9th grade with this kind of more conceptual learning, and as we go and get more specialized as we get older, focusing on America or Europe, we're able to apply the general concepts that we learn as we're freshmen into our senior and junior years.
So what I hear you saying is you're learning how to think differently in 9th grade and apply those thoughts
Exactly.
later.
It's like you teach for college, you can always learn to memorize something. Like it's way easier to learn to memorize something than learn to apply concepts. So they figure here it's probably easier to dedicate time to learn those concepts and we can memorize later. Like in college, you're not going to need to know every single thing about US history when you go into that class. You won't have to have memorized stuff from high school. You can just memorize it then or apply modeling and that kind of thing to get the bigger, broader topics that you need for college and things like that.
To me, it sounds like, hearing all of you talk, you guys are all clearly motivated learners. And I feel like this kind of thing and the concept of doing that, doing modeling in 9th grade works really well for students like you guys and gals. I'm not sure it would work for everybody doing it for a month and a half and things like that, because you guys are motivated to go out and get your own answers. You know what I mean? And not every student is like that. So I'm not.
Yeah, I think a thing that happened in Mr. Coven's class was the fact that we discussed the way we did was I remember one time we had a double block class, which was like an hour and a half long, and we had a group present at the beginning, and we had a discussion the whole rest of the class where everybody participated. And even kids who don't usually like to participate in class were adding to the discussion and that kind of thing. And it's all about the environment, I think, created in the classroom with the modeling and with the everybody contributes. And that is what really creates or begets more knowledge.
I think
That's
the
that ownership piece. I
Right.
feel like people who are less motivated to learn facts and to raise their hand and discuss in class become more motivated when they feel like it's something they produced themselves.
That's awesome.
Go ahead.
Well, this kind of relates to something we were just talking about, but I have a specific example. In my regular American U.S. history class with Dr. McAwaith, we've been doing a theme-based approach, but we haven't really been doing modeling. Instead, we've just been kind of discussing these sort of themes as they come up. And one thing we did at the beginning of the year was we were talking about the events that took place in Ferguson, Missouri, and then we used that kind of theme of the different racial tensions and things to look at other events that had happened in the past, so that kind of chronological historical aspect, and then we were able to understand those in a much stronger way because we had looked at it in more of a theme-based approach. So I think that kind of strengthened our understanding of the actual events.
Content and concepts in her class basically work together and work that way.
I have a question. Carey Academy are you pre-K through 12 or K-12?
Just 6 through 12.
Okay. Then this may not be relevant. But again, because my focus is on younger kids, I would be so interested in seeing how you can use this model and or adapt this model for a younger child whose brain is not as ready to think as critically as your brain is. And right, the abstract part, I guess, is what I'm thinking of. How could we still use something like this for younger children? Could there be something modified for them that would give them all these wonderful tools, but they'd still be able to do it?
I think sometimes for it to have meaning, I guess you have to assume that you have to have some kind of working vocabulary with which to create your model. But I also feel like, I mean, I have a 7-year-old half sister, and I feel like she's more creative and abstract than I am. Like, because I feel like she doesn't yet feel like learning is supposed to be in a strict way, and that maybe she might even be more open to it than I am. I don't know, I guess it would definitely take some experimentation.
And I think she would really enjoy that collaboration piece of working together, and they don't have to be modeling something as abstract as the ideal education.
They may not
As
be
an independent
inhibited.
study, come to my school, come to my class. I'm serious.
Thank
You know, and try it out, let's see how it works.
With little kids, there are concepts they understand. Like you could have them model friendship, bullying, all kinds of things that are known to them. You know what I mean? So they could get the practice of, and they're so creative, like you said. I mean, there's something out there. If you give a 5-year-old a paper clip and a rubber band, they'll come up with 200 things to do with it. And you give it to a 50-year-old person, and they'll come up with 5, and then they're stuck. You know, well, I can paper clip some papers and stick some things together. You know what I mean? I think they would surprise you if you gave them a construct they understood. But maybe not.
We ran over. Thank you so much for so many great questions. And check-in is from 9 to 9:30 tomorrow. We really